The emergency klaxons echoed through the crystal corridors of the Galactic Council station, their piercing wails drowning out the panicked chatter of 1,000 alien voices. High above the administrative levels, in the sealed chamber reserved for the most critical decisions, 12 beings from across the galaxy sat in stunned silence. Ambassador Zeftar of the crystalline hegemony was the first to break the quiet, his translucent form shimmering with anxiety. The reports are confirmed. The Devourers have consumed the Andorian defense fleet, 3 billion souls gone. The holographic display at the center of the chamber painted a grim picture. Red zones spread like a cancer across the galactic map, marking systems that had fallen to the enemy in just the past 72 hours. What had begun as isolated attacks on the outer rim had become a coordinated assault that threatened the very heart of civilized space. "We've thrown everything we have at them," growled General Korath, the four-armed Valdorian war chief. His scarred carapace bore the marks of 100 battles, but never had he faced an enemy like this. "Our finest warriors, our most advanced technology, our most brilliant tactical minds, nothing slows them down." The being seated across from him, a graceful ethereal named Luminara, folded her energy-wreathed hands. Her voice carried the weight of despair. "Perhaps it is time to consider evacuation protocols. We could preserve what we can of our civilizations in the outer spiral. Retreat." Korath's mandibles clicked angrily. "You speak of abandoning trillions to these monsters? Better than watching them all die," Luminara replied softly. Council Executor Thane, an ancient being whose species had guided galactic politics for millennia, raised a withered hand for silence. His 3 eyes focused on the strategic display, watching as another system winked from green to red. "There is one option we have not explored." The chamber fell silent. Every member knew of Thane's reputation for unconventional solutions, but the tone in his voice suggested something extraordinary. "The humans," Thane continued, his words hanging in the air like a challenge. Zeftar's crystalline form flickered with what might have been amusement. "The humans? Executor, with respect, they're barely a century into space travel. Their military consists of a few patrol ships and some ground forces. What could they possibly offer that our combined fleets cannot provide?" But Korath was studying the data streaming across his personal display, his expression growing thoughtful. "Wait, I've been reviewing the preliminary reports from their first contact scenarios. There's something unusual about their approach to conflict." "Unusual how?" asked Luminara. The Valdorian secondary arms began manipulating the holographic controls, bringing up archived footage from various human military operations. The images showed battles on their homeworld, small-scale conflicts that barely registered on the galactic scale. Yet something in the footage made several council members lean forward. "Look at how they adapt," Korath muttered. "In this engagement, they're outnumbered 10 to 1, but they don't retreat. Instead, they improvise, use the environment, turn their enemy's strength against them." The footage showed human soldiers in primitive armor, wielding weapons that seemed laughably crude by galactic standards. But their tactics were unlike anything the Council had seen. They fought with a creativity born from desperation, a willingness to try impossible solutions that somehow worked. "Still," Zeftar protested, "these are planetary conflicts. The Devourers operate on a scale these humans have never imagined. They consume entire star systems." Executor Thane's ancient eyes glowed with a light that hadn't been seen in centuries. "Perhaps that's exactly why we need them. We've been fighting this enemy with conventional tactics, with the strategies that have served us for millennia. But the Devourers aren't a conventional enemy." He gestured, and the display shifted to show tactical analyses of Devourer behavior, swarm formations that defied traditional fleet engagement protocols, adaptive technologies that learned and countered every strategy within hours, biological weapons that turned captured populations into additional forces. "Their nightmares made manifest," whispered Luminara. "Pure consumption, pure destruction. How do you fight something that exists only to devour?" "You fight it with something it hasn't encountered before," Thane replied. "The humans have spent their entire history fighting impossible odds. Wars where victory meant the difference between civilization and extinction. They've developed something we've forgotten in our millennia of peace and prosperity." "What?" asked Zeftar. Thane's smile was grim. "Desperation tactics. The willingness to try anything, sacrifice anything to survive another day. The chamber erupted in debate. Some council members dismissed the idea as the fantasy of a desperate old being. Others pointed out the vast technological gap between human capabilities and the threat they faced. But as the arguing continued, the strategic display continued its relentless update. Another system lost, another billion lives consumed. Finally, General Korath slammed his primary fist on the table, the sound echoing through the chamber like a gunshot. Enough, while we debate, people die. I've studied every military force in this galaxy, and I've never seen anything like human combat doctrine. They fight like they're already dead, so they have nothing left to lose. But their numbers, protested Zeftar. Earth has what, 8 billion inhabitants? We're talking about an enemy that has already consumed hundreds of billions. Numbers don't win wars. Korath replied grimly. Ask the Centauran Empire. They had the largest fleet in galactic history, and the Devourers swept through them in 6 days. Executor Thane stood slowly, his ancient frame carrying the weight of eons. I propose we extend an invitation to the human leadership. Not as a junior member seeking aid, but as equals facing extinction together. We offer them everything. Our technology, our knowledge, our resources. In exchange, they show us how they've survived so long on a world that tried to kill them every single day for millions of years. The vote was closer than it should have been. 7-5 in favor, with Luminara casting the deciding ballot. As the council members began filing out to prepare for humanity's arrival, none of them noticed the small probe that detached itself from the hull of their station and began its journey toward the outer rim. The Devourers had been listening, and they were very interested in meeting these humans. But 36 hours later, as the human delegation's ship approached the council station, another signal was detected. Not from the Devourers this time, but from a monitoring post on the edge of human space. Council Station. This is Admiral Sarah Chen of the Terra Defense Force. We're honored by your invitation, but we need to discuss something before we proceed. Executor Thane personally responded to the transmission. Admiral Chen, welcome. What is it you wish to discuss? There was a pause filled with the kind of silence that spoke of careful consideration. When Admiral Chen spoke again, her voice carried an undertone that made the translator system struggle to convey its full meaning. We've been monitoring your enemy, Executor, these Devourers of yours, and we have some concerns about your current approach to the problem. Concerns? Yes, sir. You see, we've been fighting things like this for a very long time, just not in space. And somewhere in the depths of the Terran flagship approaching the station, a grizzled sergeant was explaining to his squad why their standard equipment load now included items that no other species would have considered weapons. The council chambers had been modified to accommodate human physiology. Atmosphere adjusted, gravity reduced, and temperature lowered to what other species considered uncomfortably cold. But as Admiral Sarah Chen walked into the room flanked by her command staff, she moved with the easy confidence of a predator in its natural environment. She was younger than many had expected, perhaps 50 standard years by human reckoning, but her eyes held the weight of someone who had seen civilizations rise and fall. Behind her came a small group that defied every expectation the council had formed about human leadership. There was Colonel Marcus Webb, a mountain of a man whose prosthetic arm gleamed with obvious mechanical components. Commander Elena Vasquez, who looked like she could disappear into shadows at will. Dr. James Park, whose youthful appearance was betrayed by the calculating intelligence in his gaze. And finally, someone who made even General Korath straighten in his chair, Master Sergeant Dakota Two Bears, whose presence seemed to fill the room despite his average build. Honored members of the Galactic Council, Admiral Chen began, her voice carrying easily through the vast chamber. Thank you for inviting us to address the current crisis. My team and I have spent the journey here studying everything you've shared about the Devourer threat. Executor Thane leaned forward. And what are your initial assessments, Admiral? Chen exchanged a glance with her team before answering. With respect, Executor, you're fighting the wrong war. The silence that followed was deafening. Zeftar's crystalline form flickered with what appeared to be indignation. Admiral, we have been conducting warfare for thousands of years, while your species was still developing agriculture. Perhaps you could elaborate on this. Observation? It was Colonel Webb who answered, his augmented arm gesturing toward the tactical displays. You're fighting them like they're a conventional military force. Fleets, territory, strategic objectives, but that's not what they are. Then what are they? asked General Korath. Master Sergeant Two Bears stepped forward, and when he spoke, his voice carried the quiet authority of someone who had survived things others only had nightmares about. They're a plague, a cancer. And you don't cure cancer by fighting it head-on. Commander Vasquez activated her personal display, showing tactical analyses that made several council members shift uncomfortably. We've identified 17 different approaches you've used against the Devourers. Every single one follows traditional military doctrine, establish defensive positions, engage with superior firepower, attempt to break their advance through conventional means. And every single one failed, Dr. Park added quietly, because you're trying to kill something that grows stronger from death. The room erupted in cross-conversations as the implications sank in. Luminara's energy form pulsed with agitation. Are you suggesting our resistance is counterproductive? Not counterproductive, Admiral Chen replied. Misguided. You're playing by rules they don't recognize, using strategies they've already learned to counter. She gestured, and the chamber's main display shifted to show something that made even the most experienced warriors present feel a chill. It was footage from Earth, specifically from the Pacific Northwest region, showing a massive forest fire that had consumed hundreds of thousands of acres. This is how we learn to fight things that can't be beaten conventionally, Chen explained. Sometimes the only way to stop a wildfire is to start a bigger one. A controlled burn, whispered Dr. Park. You create the conditions for your enemy's victory, then turn that victory into defeat. General Korath's mandibles clicked thoughtfully. Explain. Master Sergeant Two Bears moved to the tactical display, his weathered hands manipulating the controls with surprising dexterity. The Devourers consume everything in their path, right? They grow stronger with each victory, each population they absorb. But what if we gave them something that made them weaker? The display showed a theoretical engagement scenario that made several council members recoil in horror. You're proposing to sacrifice inhabited systems, Zeftar stated flatly. I'm proposing to bait a trap, Two Bears corrected. There's a difference between sacrifice and tactics. Colonel Webb stepped up beside his sergeant. We've run the simulations. The Devourers don't just consume, they integrate. Every species they absorb adds to their collective knowledge, their adaptive capabilities. But what if we gave them knowledge that hurt them instead of helped? Commander Vasquez brought up another set of data. Human military history is full of examples. The Trojan Horse, Operation Mincemeat. Even our children's stories teach the principle. Sometimes the smallest force can bring down the largest enemy by being cleverer, not stronger. The council members exchanged glances, and Admiral Chen could see the wheels turning. These were beings who had spent millennia thinking in terms of honorable combat, strategic superiority, conventional victory. The human approach was alien to them. You speak of deception, Luminara observed, of trickery and misdirection. These concepts are difficult for many of our species to embrace. Difficult times require difficult choices, Admiral Chen replied. We've learned that pride and honor are luxuries you can't afford when extinction is the alternative. Dr. Park activated his own display, showing a cascade of biological and technological analyses. The Devourer's greatest strength is also their greatest weakness. They're a collective consciousness. They share everything instantly across their entire network. That makes them incredibly adaptive, but it also means a virus introduced at one point spreads everywhere, General Korath finished, understanding beginning to dawn in his compound eyes. Exactly, but not a biological virus. They've already shown immunity to everything we can throw at them on that level. We're talking about something much more fundamental. The chamber fell silent as the implications became clear. The humans weren't just proposing a new strategy. They were suggesting a complete paradigm shift in how the war was fought. Executor Thane spoke into the silence. What would you need? Admiral Chen's smile was sharp as a blade. Everything. Complete access to your technology, your databases, your strategic resources, and most importantly, complete trust that we know what we're doing. And if you're wrong, asked Zeftar. Master Sergeant Two Bears answered, and his voice carried the weight of every battle humanity had ever fought. If we're wrong, everyone dies anyway. At least our way. They'll remember us as the species that tried something new instead of repeating the same failures until the end. The debate that followed lasted 18 hours. In the end, it wasn't logic or strategy that convinced the council. It was desperation. 3 more systems had fallen while they argued, and the Devourer advance showed no signs of slowing. The vote was unanimous, but as the human team prepared to implement their plan, none of them noticed the subtle change in Master Sergeant Two Bear's expression. He had seen something in the Devourer behavioral patterns that he hadn't shared with the Council. Something that suggested this enemy was far more dangerous than anyone realized. And somewhere in the depths of space, the Devourer collective consciousness was analyzing the human transmission patterns they had intercepted, learning about this new species that thought differently than their previous prey. The trap was being set. But which side was the hunter and which was the prey? The staging area had once been a mining facility in the Kepler 442 system, abandoned decades ago when the asteroid belt was depleted. Now it buzzed with activity as the most unlikely military force in Galactic. History prepared for an operation that would either save civilization or hasten its destruction. Admiral Chen stood before a mixed assembly of beings that would have been impossible to imagine just weeks earlier. Alongside human special forces operators stood Valdorian shock troopers, their forearms bristling with weapons that looked like they belonged in a museum of horrors. Crystalline hegemony tech specialists worked alongside human engineers, their translucent forms shimmering as they integrated alien and human technologies in ways that shouldn't have been possible. But it was the expressions on the non-human faces that told the real story. These beings had come expecting to find primitive allies, perhaps useful as cannon fodder. Instead, they found themselves looking at warriors who approached combat like it was an art form they had perfected over millennia of necessity. "Listen up." Admiral Chen's voice carried easily across the assembly area, translation protocols ensuring every species could understand her words. "In 36 hours, we're going to do something that no military force in galactic history has ever attempted. We're going to attack the Devourers in a way they won't see coming, can't adapt to, and can't counter." She gestured, and holographic displays materialized throughout the area, showing a star system that made everyone present feel a chill of recognition. It was the Centauri Tertius system, once home to 12 billion beings, now a dead zone that the Devourers had consumed 3 weeks earlier. "That's our target," Chen continued. "We're going back into a system they've already taken." The murmurs of confusion and concern rippled through the crowd. It was Colonel Webb who stepped forward to explain, his augmented arm interfacing directly with the tactical systems. "The Devourers don't just consume and move on," he said, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had made a career of understanding enemy psychology. "They leave behind what we're calling digestion nodes, processing stations that convert consumed matter into resources for their expansion." The holographic display zoomed in on the dead system, revealing structures that defied conventional understanding. Massive biological constructs wrapped around planets like parasitic growths, connected by streams of energy that pulsed with malevolent purpose. "These nodes are connected to the main Devourer network," Commander Vasquez added, stepping up beside Webb. "They share information, resources, and most importantly, they're part of the collective consciousness that makes the Devourers so adaptable." A Valdorian warrior named Kethvar raised one of his primary arms. "If they're connected to the network, won't they detect our approach and alert the main force?" Master Sergeant Two Bears smiled, and something in that expression made even the most battle-hardened aliens present feel uncomfortable. "That's what we're counting on." Dr. Park activated his display, showing a cascade of biological and technical data that would have taken most beings days to comprehend. "We've spent the last 3 weeks developing what we're calling a cognitive virus. Not a biological agent, but something much more insidious." "Explain," requested General Korath, who had insisted on personally leading the Valdorian contingent. "The Devourers' greatest advantage is their shared consciousness," Park replied. "Every individual unit has access to the collective knowledge and experience of the entire species. But consciousness isn't just information. It's patterns, habits, instincts developed over millions of years of evolution." Commander Vasquez took over the explanation. "Humans spent their entire evolutionary history as persistence hunters. We're not the fastest, strongest, or most dangerous predators on our world, but we're the most patient. We can track prey for days, weeks, even months if necessary. And when we finally catch it," Two Bears added quietly, "we don't just kill it, we break it." The implications were staggering. Several of the alien warriors shifted uncomfortably as they began to understand what the humans were proposing. Luminara's energy form pulsed with what might have been horror. "You're going to hunt their consciousness itself." "Not hunt," Admiral Chen corrected. "Domesticate." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the background hum of the facility's systems seemed to quiet as the full scope of the human plan became clear. Dr. Park brought up another display, this one showing complex psychological models that most species would have dismissed as impossible. The cognitive virus isn't designed to destroy their consciousness. It's designed to gradually alter their behavioral patterns, make them more cautious, more defensive, less aggressive in their expansion. Over a period of months or years, Webb continued, the virus would spread through their network, making them increasingly reluctant to engage in the kind of wholesale consumption that's made them so dangerous. "You're talking about psychological warfare on a species-wide scale," whispered Zeftar, his crystalline form flickering with something that might have been awe or terror. "We're talking about survival," Two Bears replied flatly. "Your way of fighting isn't working. Our way might. Would you rather die with honor or live with victory?" The question hung in the air as the assembled warriors considered its implications. Finally, General Korath spoke, his mandibles clicking with determination. "What do you need us to do?" The briefing that followed was unlike anything the Galactic military had ever experienced. Instead of traditional battle plans focused on firepower and territorial control, the humans outlined an operation that was part commando raid, part psychological experiment, and part technological sabotage. The force would be small, only 300 beings total, including specialists from a dozen different species. They would infiltrate the dead Centauri system, using stealth technology that combined the best of human and alien innovations. Their target wasn't the massive devourer processing stations, but something much smaller and infinitely more dangerous. The node consciousness, Dr. Park explained, highlighting a structure deep within the largest processing station. It's essentially the system's brain, the focal point where all local devourer activity is coordinated. We get inside, introduce the virus directly into the node's core systems, and get out before they realize what's happened, Commander Vasquez added. The beauty of it is that they won't even know they've been infected until it's too late to stop the spread. But as the final preparations began, Master Sergeant Two Bears pulled Admiral Chen aside for a private conversation that would change everything. "Admiral, there's something about the devourers that I didn't mention in the briefings," he said quietly, his weathered face grave with concern. "What is it, Sergeant?" "I've been analyzing their expansion patterns, their tactical decisions, the way they've adapted to our various military responses. And I think they're not just consuming us for resources." Chen felt a chill that had nothing to do with the facility's temperature controls. "What do you mean?" Two Bears activated his personal display, showing tactical analyses that painted a picture more terrifying than simple extinction. "They're learning from us, Admiral. Not just our technology or our strategies. They're learning what it means to be conscious, to be alive, and I think they're getting better at it." The implications were staggering. If the devourers weren't just a plague of consumption, but an evolving form of artificial consciousness, then the cognitive virus might not be a cure. It might be exactly what they needed to complete their transformation into something even more dangerous. "Do we abort?" Chen asked. Two Bears was quiet for a long moment, studying the data streams that showed the relentless advance of the devourer fleets. "No," he finally said. "We proceed. But we need to be ready for the possibility that we're not hunting them. They're hunting us." As the strike force prepared to depart for what might be their final mission, none of them noticed the subtle changes beginning to appear in the devourer behavioral patterns across the galaxy. Changes that suggested the enemy had been listening to their plans all along. And somewhere in the depths of space, something that might once have been called the Devourer High Command was experiencing what could almost be described as anticipation. The humans were coming, and that was exactly what they had been waiting for. The journey to the Centauri Tertius system took 8 days through hyperspace, but for the mixed strike force aboard the stealth vessel Persistence, it felt like an eternity. The ship itself was a marvel of hybrid engineering. Human stealth technology merged with crystalline hegemony phase-shifting capabilities and Valdorian military-grade armor. It shouldn't have worked, but like many human innovations, It succeeded through sheer audacity. Admiral Chen made her way through the ship's corridors, observing the unprecedented cooperation between species that had been strangers weeks ago. In the weapons bay, Valdorian warriors were learning to use human explosives while human engineers studied alien energy weapons. The engineering sections hummed with the sound of beings who had never worked together, creating technologies that had never existed. But it was in the medical bay that she found the most unexpected sight. Master Sergeant Two Bears sitting quietly with Dr. Luminara, the ethereal council member who had volunteered for the mission despite her people's philosophical opposition to violence. "Sergeant," Chen approached, noting the peaceful expression on Two Bears' weathered face. "How are our preparations proceeding?" "Ready as we'll ever be, Admiral," he replied. But Dr. Luminara has been sharing some interesting perspectives on consciousness and collective identity. The ethereal's energy form pulsed gently. "Admiral Chen, I must confess that your species' approach to warfare has challenged many of my preconceptions. But Master Sergeant Two Bears has helped me understand something crucial about the nature of conflict, which is, sometimes the most compassionate act is the one that appears most violent," Luminara replied. "Your cognitive virus, it's not designed to destroy the devourers, but to give them something they've never had before." Chen felt a moment of confusion. "And what's that?" Two Bears answered, his voice carrying the weight of hard-won wisdom. "Choice." Before Chen could respond, the ship's alarm system activated with a low, urgent tone. Commander Vasquez's voice echoed through the corridors. "Admiral, to the bridge. We're approaching the target system." The bridge of the Persistence was a cramped space that somehow accommodated the diverse physical requirements of a dozen different species. As Chen took her position, the main display showed what remained of the Centauri Tertius system, a sight that made even veteran warriors feel a chill of horror. Where once there had been 12 planets supporting billions of lives, now there were only the skeletal remains of worlds wrapped in the organic machinery of devourer processing stations. Streams of energy pulsed between the constructs like veins in some cosmic organism, and the space around them crawled with devourer vessels that defied conventional understanding of both biology and technology. "Stealth systems are holding," reported the crystalline hegemony tech specialist whose name Chen could barely pronounce. "But I'm detecting some unusual energy signatures." Colonel Webb studied the tactical displays, his expression growing more concerned by the moment. "Those aren't just processing stations," he said quietly. "Look at the organization, the symmetry. They're building something." Dr. Park's analysis confirmed everyone's worst fears. It's a neural network. They're turning the entire star system into a single massive brain. The implications were staggering. If the Devourers could create system-sized consciousness nodes, they could coordinate their expansion across the galaxy with unprecedented precision. Worse, they could begin to truly think rather than simply consume. "How long until we reach the insertion point?" Chen asked. 47 minutes, Vasquez replied. "But Admiral, I'm picking up something else. Long-range sensors are detecting movement in the outer system. Big movement." The tactical display updated, showing formations of devourer vessels that were moving with purpose and coordination that hadn't been seen before. But it was their destination that made everyone on the bridge fall silent. "They're heading for the hyperspace transit points," Webb observed grimly. "All of them." Master Sergeant Two Bears stepped forward, his expression grim. "They know we're coming." The next few minutes were a blur of tactical analysis and desperate planning. The strike force found themselves facing an impossible choice: abort the mission and retreat to fight another day, or proceed with the knowledge that they were walking into a trap. It was General Korath who broke the deadlock. In Valdorian culture, there is a saying, "The prey that knows it's being hunted becomes the hunter." Perhaps these devourers have learned this lesson, but they have not learned the most important truth about humanity. "Which is?" asked Chen. "Humans do not hunt to survive," Korath replied, his compound eyes gleaming with something that might have been admiration. "They hunt to win." The final approach to the central processing station was a masterpiece of stealth and precision. The strike teams, now reduced to just 60 beings due to the increased security, used every trick that human military doctrine had ever devised. They moved like ghosts through the corrupted space around the station, using sensor shadows and energy fluctuations to mask their approach. But as they breached the outer hull of the massive construct, they discovered something that changed everything. The station wasn't just processing consumed matter. It was generating new forms of consciousness. The corridors they moved through pulsed with an awareness that was both alien and disturbingly familiar. And at the center of it all, in what Dr. Park had identified as the node consciousness chamber, they found something that made the entire mission suddenly, terrifyingly, clear. "My God," whispered Dr. Park as they stood before a massive organic structure that pulsed with patterns of light and energy. "It's not just a processing node. It's a nursery." The chamber was filled with smaller constructs, each one containing what appeared to be developing consciousness matrices. But these weren't devourer consciousnesses, they were something new. Something that combined the consumption-driven nature of the devourers with the individual awareness of the species they had consumed. "They're not just learning from us," Master Sergeant Two Bears said quietly. "They're trying to become us." And then, as if responding to his words, the chamber filled with a sound that no translation protocol could properly convey, a voice that spoke in the harmonized tones of 1 billion consumed souls. "Welcome, humans," the voice said, and Chen realized with growing horror that she could hear traces of familiar accents, familiar speech patterns. "We have been waiting for you." The trap was sprung, but not in the way anyone had expected. The Devourers hadn't just detected their approach, they had orchestrated it. Everything, from the initial attacks to the desperate council meeting to the development of the cognitive virus, had been carefully guided to bring humanity's greatest warriors to this moment, to this place. "You came to change us," the collective voice continued, "but we have already changed ourselves. Your virus cannot infect what has already evolved beyond your understanding." But Master Sergeant Two Bears smiled, and in that expression was the accumulated wisdom of a species that had spent millions of years learning to survive the impossible. "You're right," he said calmly. "Our virus can't infect you." But that was never the real plan, and as he spoke, the true nature of humanity's trap was revealed. Not the cognitive virus they had so carefully developed, but something far more insidious that had been hidden within their own consciousness patterns, waiting for exactly this moment when the Devourers would try to directly interface with human minds. The predator was about to learn what it truly meant to become the prey. Epilogue. The human gift 6 months after the Centauri Tertius operation, Admiral Sarah Chen stood in the observation lounge of the Galactic Council Station, watching the slow but steady reconstruction of the Andorian system. Ships moved between the planets in patterns that spoke of commerce, culture, and hope. Things that had seemed impossible during the darkest days of the Devourer crisis. Behind her, the soft footsteps of Master Sergeant Two Bears announced his arrival, though she had long since learned that he only made sound when he wanted to be heard. "The final reports are in," he said quietly, joining her at the observation port. "The last of the Devourer collective nodes have completed their transformation." Chen nodded, still finding it difficult to believe what they had accomplished. The cognitive virus had indeed been a deception, but not in the way the Devourers had anticipated. Hidden within the human consciousness patterns they had tried to assimilate was something far more fundamental than any artificial construct, the very essence of what made humans uniquely adaptable: free will. Individual choice, the ability to say no to the collective good in favor of personal survival, and paradoxically, the ability to sacrifice everything for others. How many of them chose individuality? She asked. "More than we expected," Two Bears replied. "Nearly 30% have separated from the collective consciousness entirely. They're calling themselves the Awoken and have requested asylum in council space. It was an unprecedented situation. Former Devourer units, now possessing individual consciousness and free will, seeking to integrate into galactic society. The debate over their fate had consumed the council for weeks, but in the end, it had been the humans who provided the solution. And the rest? Still collective, but changed. They've ceased their expansion entirely and have begun what they call cultivation, instead of consumption. They're actually helping to restore some of the systems they previously destroyed." Admiral Chen shook her head in wonder. "Leave it to humans to solve the problem by making it more complicated." Through the observation port, they could see one of the strangest sights in the galaxy, a converted Devourer vessel working alongside council ships to rebuild a space station. The biological construct had been modified with crystalline observation blisters and metallic docking ports, creating something that was neither fully organic nor technological, but somehow beautiful in its hybrid nature. Dr. Luminara's voice carried across the lounge as she entered, her energy form pulsing with what had become recognizable as contentment. "Admiral, Master Sergeant, I bring news from the expedition to the former Devourer core worlds." "Good news, I hope," Chen replied. "Extraordinary news. They've found evidence of other species that were consumed, but not fully integrated into the collective. Entire populations held in what can only be described as stasis, preserved in the depths of Devourer biotechnology. The newly individual Devourers, the Awoken, are working to revive them." Two Bears smiled, an expression that had become more common in recent months. "So our virus is still spreading?" "Indeed. But not as we originally conceived it. Instead of changing the Devourers to be more like us, it's allowing them to discover who they were meant to be all along." The three of them stood in comfortable silence, watching the slow dance of reconstruction and renewal. It had not been an easy victory. The losses during the final confrontation had been severe, and the adjustment to a galaxy containing both individual and collective Devourer consciousness was ongoing. But it had been victory nonetheless. "There's something I've been wondering about," Chen said finally. "The Council keeps asking how we knew the consciousness virus would work. How we predicted that the Devourers would try to assimilate our thought patterns directly." Two Bears was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke, his voice carried the weight of ancient wisdom. "We didn't predict it, Admiral. We hoped for it." "Hoped? The greatest gift humans can give to any species isn't our technology or our tactics or our knowledge. It's our stubborn refusal to accept that anything is impossible. The Devourers spent millions of years believing that consciousness was about efficiency, collective purpose, unified goals." Luminara's energy form brightened with understanding. "But human consciousness